Thank you very much, Kamla, and welcome to everybody back to this second session of today. It is with great pleasure that I introduce to you all Dr. Ficociello. She comes to us with 17 years of experience in corporate governance, risk and compliance in public and private sector and in state-owned entities. She also says that she is passionate about matters relating to sustainability, ESG, especially as it relates to the marine ecosystems. She is currently the Chief Governance Officer at the Red Sea Development Company, and she is going to take us on a journey in the world of regenerative tourism. She will be a guide who is passionate about preserving the natural beauty of Saudi Arabia and passionate also about the governance practices and principle-based way to manage, monitor internal controls. So over to you, Maryam.
Thank you very much, Brenda. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, I guess, to everyone from all parts of the world. I'll start with giving you a background on what the Red Sea Development Project is. And I'm playing a video in the background I hope everyone can see. So basically, we are a development company, a tourism development company. We're part of Saudi Arabia's ambitious Vision 2030 to diversify the economy away from oil. And as part of that diversification, Saudi Arabia started focusing on things like tourism. We never had the tourism sector before. It started looking at entertainment and sports amongst a number of other areas where we can diversify. So our project specifically is very focused on tourism and regenerative tourism. A lot of the area that we're developing, we're leaving untouched. So about 90% of the islands and the marine area that we are in, we will not develop. We will only develop about 10% of it. And you can see a number of pictures that kind of describe to you what the beauty of the area is. And we plan to welcome about 1 million visitors a year to this destination. And we've limited the number of visitors because we don't want to put too much pressure on the environment. We're lucky that our king and crown prince, and that was just our CEO there, had endorsed our master plan a couple of years ago in 2018. We've been working on building the constructs and the islands up. We will welcome our very first visitors to the island in 13 months, so in December 2022. And the pictures you're seeing in front of you, along with some of the text, describes who our designers are, our partners, and what our hotels are planned to look like. So I hope that one day we will soon welcome you all and maybe even host this conference in the Red Sea Development Company on site. And that's our airport there in the picture that is being presented. And that's the runway of the airport. So we will have an international airport dedicated because it's in an area that is greenfield. There are some local villages around our area. We have a very big emphasis on all parts of sustainability, the economic side, the social side, and the environmental side. So we're now, some of the pictures that are playing are our worker village, where we've ensured that we are building facilities for them that really are comfortable and where they can really feel dignified and live a comfortable life. We're also, the pictures right now are showing our staff village where the hotel workers as well as our employees will be living. One important factor too is that we're enabling the local community that lives in the area. So there are a number of villages around us that are small villages that have between 30,000 to 40,000 people only. The majority of our employees and who will be servicing the hotels will be from the villages. We've also built a very big nursery. These are pictures from our nursery, and it's fully staffed by people from the local villages. The villages actually, or the villagers around us, are farmers. So they have a number of crops that they've been growing for years. And one of our social sustainability projects is to help them improve their crops, because we will look at them to supply us with a lot of our produce as well. The images are going back to some of our hotels now. So just in the context of all of this, the idea of the video was to show you kind of what the destination will look like. But I thought it would be interesting for the session today if I presented to you something that we've done at the Red Sea Development Company, which is to ensure that we have very strong internal controls across the project. So I'm going to stop sharing this video, and I'm just going to pull up my presentation. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so what we did is, because we started only in 2017, I'm assuming you can see my slide, the internal controls toolkit. So this is also an effort that we've been working on from our very beginning, from our inception. In 2017, when we started working, we thought, okay, we're a startup with a big investment from the company, from the country. We're a national project, and we want to ensure that all this public money gets spent right. And so we started developing what we called our internal controls toolkit. We recently made it publicly available. So these slides are all publicly available for anyone to make use of in any place in the world. And they've actually also been endorsed by Paul Sobel, who is the COSO chairman. And the idea was that I wanted to ensure, and everyone, the leadership and our board wanted to ensure that we have the right internal controls in our project as we developed. And internal controls is, obviously something very important in the world of corporate governance. So the approach that we took is we wanted to ensure that we have some sort of framework that makes sense for us to use. It details all the different controls. What do we need to have in terms of controls in year 1, in year 2, in year 3? As we grow our project and grow our company and our destination, those controls need to also grow and mature with time. So it wouldn't make sense that we have, for example, an internal audit department, which is an important internal control, from year 1. It made more sense that we have it in year 2, because in year 1 we were still building up our policies, for example. And then finally, we wanted to also ensure that there's continuous improvement and monitoring for everything we do. The known definition of internal controls as per the COSO internal controls framework is that it's the processes that we use to ensure that the board really has some sort of assurance that the company is doing the right thing, and that there is assurance around how things are being done in terms of operations, reporting, and compliance. So what we have shared now with the world, and what I'm sharing with you today, is this guide that we used internally, we developed and progressed with over time. This is really our golden book. This is what we use. We report on it on a quarterly basis to both our audit committee and our board. And it includes in it a number of tools that are now publicly available, including sample policies, sample DOAs, sample a bunch of samples to help other entities set up their internal controls. And we looked at multiple options for kind of how to build up the right internal controls framework. We ended up choosing COSO. I'm sure you're familiar with COSO. It's a known framework that's been out there for a long time. We decided that it fitted what we're looking for the best. And we later on, just last year, reached out to Paul Sobel, who's the COSO chairman, showed him what we've done, and he actually endorsed our work, because if you're familiar with COSO, you'd know that COSO is quite subjective. So it sets up for you kind of a number of a framework that is really very subjective in how you implement it. And what we tried to do is take that very subjective toolkit and make it a bit more objective and matched on to like a time frame that fits kind of an entrepreneur or startup or any company's maturity as it kind of grows over time. So what COSO is, for those of you that are not very familiar, I won't go into the details, but it's made up of a number of items. It's made up of a number of components, principles, and points of focus and controls. And basically, it's kind of this cube structure that you can choose and mix and match what works for you in your organization. That's the subjective piece in it. It talks about the control environment, the importance of risk management or assessment, control activities, monitoring activities, and it's really up to the individual or the company to apply those as you see fit. So what we did is we took those components and put them across kind of our maturity levels as we grow. And we also detailed them into kind of, to try and make it a bit more objective. We took each one of those principles and points of focus and said, okay, what does this mean in an actual control? So when COSO talks about controls, it doesn't list all the controls in the world. It says policies, for example, it says somewhere internal audit, but it doesn't say every piece of a control that is out there. And so we tried to make it a bit more objective by saying, okay, when we're talking about commitment to integrity and ethical values as a principle in the control environment in COSO, their point of contacts are these, point of focus are these things, that there should be, you know, the tone set from the top, there should be some sort of evaluation of adherence to standards. And for us, our interpretation of that is that there should be a very clear mandate for the company or the startup on what they want to do, so they focus. There should be some sort of board or higher authority overseeing the entity. There should be a code of conduct, there should be a whistleblowing platform, there should be internal audits. And we did that, the same thing for each one of the components of COSO. That's how we kind of tried to objectify it. And then we also set that across an implementation roadmap. And so the implementation roadmap, I'm presenting it here, is basically depending on where your organization is in its development and in its maturity. If you're at very early stages of your incubation, you're a startup, for example, at this stage, you really want to make sure that there is clarity on a number of controls. And then when you grow into a more advanced launching stage or growth stage, there's a certain number of controls you want then. And then when you move forward, there's a certain other number of controls. And so we ended up with really two internal controls frameworks, depending on where people are. We use this one, the establishment phase framework, and I'll go into the details of it very quickly now, for our first 2 years. And then we moved into this one, which is ongoing operations framework for the last year and this year. So this is stable state in a way. And this is what that framework looks like. I want to emphasize that this is tried and tested. We not only tried it in the Red Sea, we tried it in our sister company, Amala. We also tried it in some of the other projects that are also big national projects here in Saudi Arabia. So, and this is what we present also on a quarterly basis to our audit committee and to our board to give them assurance on how we're doing against our internal controls framework. So early stages of our development, we made sure that there's very clear legal status and mandate for our startup and our company and what we're trying to do, that an authority and upper body, either we have boards, obviously some entities might just have, you know, a board of managers, that we have a clear mandate, that we have preliminary governance charters, that we have a CEO appointed. You know, these are all for us internal controls, that we have preliminary HR procurement finance manuals developed, that we have function heads, that we have budgets defined, and that we have operational plans. All of this was meant to be in phase 1. And then phase 2, which is the next 6 months, we moved into other things like detailed marketing and PR strategies, legal entity establishments. And then we moved into more internal controls and more internal controls. And the way we would present this to our audit committee and board is we would actually show it to them based on what's completed over here, what's in progress, what's delayed, and what hasn't started. And it was a very good tool for us in our, I head up the governance, risk, and compliance department. So it was a very good way for us to also, I guess, pressurize and you know, convince management that we need to put these things in place. Because we report on it quarterly, everyone wants to show progress to our audit committee and our board. So it was a very good tool in kind of getting the momentum going as well in setting all these internal controls. As I said, all of this was set for the first 2 years of our development. We now are in stage 2 of our maturity, which is ongoing operations. So we're in year 4. before. And this is kind of what we report now. This is just illustrative. So we would go to our audit committee or our board and we'd say, you know, we're doing well, and you know, we're up to date in the items that are showing in gold. The items that are showing in green need to be updated because we review this on an annual basis. Sometimes we have things that are a bit delayed, and you know, we mitigate for those delays and make estimations of when we'll have them closed. But overall, it's been really a very structured way of ensuring that we build up our internal controls system internally, and in a way that also matures with time, so that we don't overburden management with too many requirements, but we also ensure that we have, for example, internal audit departments set up after we've set up policies, and that we have, you know, all the main internal controls in place. So as I said, that's pretty much what I wanted to share with everyone today. We've launched it as a CSR initiative earlier this year. It's available online on our website. It's in our homepage under the governance section, and it has samples for everyone to use, from policies, governance policies, to detailed budgets. It really all needs about 10 to 15% customization, and you're good to go. And really the whole kind of, you know, objective was we went through this whole journey, and we want to make sure that other people benefit from it, because the better governance, you know, the more governance we have in different entities, the better off we all are. So that's what I wanted to share with you, and feel welcome to download the toolkit and even reach out to us if you need any support. We're very happy to support other entities build up their internal controls.
Thank you very much, Maryam. What a comprehensive view, and what impresses me in all of this is this idea about it being a CSR initiative. The idea about sharing this with other people who are also going through this startup process, and launching a very, very exciting and original idea and making it into reality. So a really wonderful presentation. Thank you very much indeed. So let me turn now to our panelists. Do we have Claire with us? Is Claire here? Yes, she is here. Well, thank you, Claire. So I'd like to ask, I'd like to introduce Claire. Claire is a certified internal auditor and certified risk management assurance professional with over 30 years internal auditing experience in the energy and state sectors at the senior executive level. And she's currently serving as a board member of a state and private organizations in the energy sector. So I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say in response to this initiative and this system of internal controls. So over to you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Maryam and Brenda. Yes. I think that Maryam has done an excellent presentation on the practical aspect of internal control, which can be very nebulous, as we all know it. So I'm going to just try to share my my company's internal control policy, which I think will bring another practical aspect to the presentation today. So just if you can give me one moment, if I can share my screen. All right. So are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to go into CLICO's internal control policy. And I believe that that would give you a good sense of the instrument to really drive home your internal control within any organization. I did go through Maryam's toolkit, and they're excellent templates that any organization can use. It will save them a lot of work. Thank you very much, Maryam. I did not see your internal control policy though, so that's why I decided to share ours. So Maryam, if you don't mind.
Yes, I love that you have an internal controls policy. We don't, so I'd love to get a copy of yours at some point and see how we can benefit from that. We don't have a policy in place for internal controls, but that's pretty cool.
Yes, because I'll definitely share. I have to give you some historical notes. Years ago, when they first launched COSO internal control framework, we tried to introduce it in the organization that I was in. And we in internal audit, we felt so proud, yes, to get internal control and the control self-assessment within the organization. And that would have been in somewhere in the 1990s. I'm pretty young, so don't don't age me because of that, yes. But sometime in the 1990s. And we made sure that the president of the organization was present along with the members of the executive management team, because we always believe that starting with internal control is trying to make sure that you set the right control environment, which means it's all about the tone at the top. So we would always go to the right up to the top, and we started with the president and his executive management team. And after we did this wonderful presentation, you know, he turned around and he said, Claire, I don't care what you say, that internal control is everybody's business. Internal control is the responsibility of internal audit. I don't want to hear anything more. So just imagine that you are now trying to introduce internal control principles and internal control framework in organizations that in those days, they never cared about policies and procedures and those sort of things that mandated how they are to function. Yes, having a controlled organization, which is the responsibility of the board. In those days, hearing about COSO internal control framework, it was like, you know, giving them some poison. And they did not understand that sometimes medicine can be, you know, medicine can come from poison. And I think that I am happy to say that at this point in time, where organizations, not only globally, but within Trinidad and Tobago and the region, the Caribbean region, we have embraced COSO internal control framework, and we have reached a certain level of maturity in all of the organizations that I know of. Yes, so coming from where an organization thought that when you speak of control, it is all about internal audit and not about control being everybody's business, to now being embraced as one of the key element in corporate governance. Because as we always say, governance is all about directing and controlling the organization. To help the organization understand the responsibility and the players for internal control, we were forced to establish the internal control policy. And when I went into CLICO, I was happy to make sure that we started off with not only enterprise risk management, but also internal control, because internal control and risk management go hand in hand. Yes, along with your strategic plan and your balanced scorecard. So those are your tools within your governance framework. So going quickly through our internal control policy, I'm just trying to move my little screen somewhere down. Right, yes. All right, so of course the endorsement is always important so that we set the right tone at the top. So CLICO's system of internal control is fundamental to its successful response to risk within the organization's governance, operations, and information systems regarding the achievement of the organization's strategic objectives, reliability and integrity of financial and operational information, effectiveness and efficiency of operations and programs, safeguarding of assets, and compliance with laws, regulations, policies, procedures, and contracts. So what Maryam would have been showing you would have been everything that pertained to their operations would more or less fit within this framework of control. And the board of directors in its governance role is ultimately responsible for directing and controlling the organization. And the board has therefore established this internal control policy to ensure the organization establishes and maintains controls that are adequate, effective, and efficient in responding to the company's risks and sufficient to ensure company goals and objectives are achieved as intended. So as we said before, risk and controls go hand in hand. And the governance framework, which means to say that there must be this internal control policy along with all of the other governance policies to really drive that organization to achieve all of those objectives. So controlling is an integral part of managing operations. A lot of managers don't ever believe that they are responsible for controls. And as I said before, that 30 years ago, COSO is everybody, internal control is everybody's business. Management never believed that that was part of their responsibility. And you know, it's amazing that a lot of managers don't know how to draft control policies and procedures, etc. And that is something that I think that we need to be able to develop from the supervisory level straight up into management. Management at all times must strive to maintain adequate controls and appropriate internal control environment and promote continuous improvement. And I believe Maryam talked about that internal control environment that had to be set, and setting it within the context of making sure that the management recognized that the progress that was being made with the internal control framework was being overseen by the board audit committee at all times. And that quarterly reporting that was being done by her and her team would have been the driver to make sure that her control framework was embedded within the organization. The internal control policy was approved by CLICO board. Well, of course, you'd have to make sure that, again, your annual reviews and making sure that you disseminate to reinforce that tone that you really want to set, that you want a controlled environment organization. Right? So CLICO's board audit and risk committee is charged with direct oversight through internal audit of the internal control systems established for the company. And of course, your normal coercion of trying to make sure that everyone understand that you know, breaches and non-compliance and non-conformance of the company's policies will not be accepted. Right? So again, the board of directors endorsement of the internal control policy underscores the importance of having CLICO as a risk intelligent and controlled organization. When I took charge of CLICO, which is Colonial Life Insurance Company Trinidad Limited, it was in 2017, and their vision and mission, etc., was excellent. Just needed a few tweaks. But what I found was missing would have been that risk intelligence and their corporate compliance, yeah, and the level of control that we needed now to put in that organization. So basically, my job was all around improving the governance of the organization. So within the internal control policy, you'll see the internal control objectives, scope, applicability, the concept of controlling, which is very important, management's responsibility for controlling company operations, which needs to be driven home. Otherwise, managers are not going to take that seriously. As we said before, oftentimes they believe that control and drafting of policies and procedures and making sure that there's a plan in place, etc. I don't think that they really embrace it as willingly as they ought to. And then, of course, internal audit role and responsibility for evaluating controls. So the internal control objective to establish management's responsibility for controlling the operations of the company in accordance with legal and regulatory requirements and the board's risk tolerance levels. So of course, you must be able to have the right risk tolerance levels for the organization so that management and drafting their policies and procedures, and we don't say drafting really, we say designing their controls. They more understand that whether the organization is a risk taker, whether it is risk averse, whether it is taking too much risk. So there must be a balance across the organization, and that allows management now to design the appropriate control framework. To delegate authority, responsibility, and accountability for establishing and approving policies and procedures for controlling company operations. A lot of time when it is that it's unclear as to who has the authority to sign off on policies and procedures and standard operating procedures, etc., you would find that it takes a long time to really and truly complete the design, get the approvals, then to disseminate and then to enforce. So you want to make sure that your internal controlling policy includes that the delegation of authority, at least at that high level. To assign responsibilities for oversight, management, and reporting of internal control. Again, those are critical elements, because it's not only about just designing the control system, but also making sure that it is working in the way that it was designed, and also continuous improvement in case that some of the controls need to be improved. So of course, the corporate policy statement on controlling operations covers the 3 dimensions of control: the concept of controlling, management's responsibility for controlling, internal audit's role and responsibility for evaluating the process of controlling. And right, well, of course, it goes across the organization. And most importantly, right, management at all levels are required to comply with this policy, as internal controls is an integral part of the responsibilities of management. And this has to be said at all points in time. It has to be reinforced. It also has to go into their job descriptions. Yes, it has to go into their KPIs. Otherwise, I always say that when management is not in control, it means to say someone within that organization, some informal leader is controlling the organization. And sometimes your informal leaders are not the ones, they are not officers of the company. And oftentimes they can do a lot of hurt or bring a lot of hurt to the organization if they are out of control themselves. So we need to be mindful as to when the tail is wagging the dog, as they would simply say. So if the management is not controlling the organization, then somebody down there, maybe a junior staff, someone is making control decisions for the organization. The concept of controlling. Control is any action taken by the board, executive management, a manager or process owner, and other parties to manage risk and increase the likelihood that established objectives and goals will be achieved. Management plans, organizes, and directs the performance of sufficient actions to provide reasonable assurance that objectives and goals will be achieved. So again, in the control setting, oftentimes you will see exactly what are the objectives that the organization is attempting to achieve. And you may have the overall objectives, your strategic objectives, and you may have the specific objectives, even if it is, let's say, for a specific project. Yes, but at all points in time, the board or executive management would more or less articulate that objective and set the objective that management must achieve. Hence, controlling is any action taken by board and management to enhance the probability that established goals and objectives will be achieved. So what you're seeing here is that control is not, it's not something airy-fairy, it's not just theory, it is something all about how do we ensure that we are putting in certain measures or actions in place. We are guiding the organization so that they themselves know exactly what do we need to do to achieve the objectives and goals of the organization. And those actions may be either preventive, to deter undesirable events from occurring, detective, to detect and correct undesirable events which have occurred, or directive, to cause or encourage a desirable event to occur. And sometimes you may find, and I believe all of us would have had this experience, where it is that you believe that you have designed the best, let's say, policy in place. And then when you go there, the auditors start stripping it apart and they say, no, it's incomplete because you're not seeing this control, or you're not seeing the action items that must be executed to encourage that desirable event to occur. So when the auditors are looking at or reviewing your policies and procedures, etc., they are looking for all of those elements that will ensure that the goal and the objectives are going to be achieved. And that is why you find them pointing out maybe deficiencies within your policy and procedures and plans as you would have designed them. Whatever form the action may take, controlling is a positive force exerted through people to achieve a stated goal or objective. So it is not about preparing a policy and then putting it on the shelf and not ensuring that it is properly disseminated and everyone understands how it's supposed to be executed, and also the repercussion if it is not executed as designed. Yeah. Now, bear in mind that sometimes when it is designed, you may still have some gaps, so you still have to allow for that. And so under continuous improvement, you must ensure that there's proper communication coming through from the operators of those policies, those who are actually executing, so that they can tell you, well, look, I'm not too sure that this is what, you know, the interpretation of it might be a bit ambiguous, or maybe it is that it is just not complete, or maybe the exception to the rule is not being appropriately addressed within the policy. So making sure that that communication from the bottom to go right back up to the top and then top to bottom. So that communication loop is very important, from the designing of the policies, the enforcing of the policies. It's making sure that it is working the way it is supposed to be working. Yeah, the four broad generic objectives of controlling operations are to safeguard the resources for which the individual manager is responsible, including human resources and the goodwill of the company. Sometimes they forget about that. And sometimes the policy doesn't deal with, let's say, even customer complaints, yeah, which from all of your process, be it internal customers, etc. So you also need to be aware of the esoteric type of processes that need to be dealt with within your control framework. Ensure the reliability of data, information, and disclosures. Sometimes we forget the disclosures and we only talk about what the system is to, the inputs of the system and the output of the system, etc. Sometimes we don't look at, okay, the information is being generated, but how do we protect the disclosure, and how do we ensure that the disclosure is being made to the right persons at the right time? So oftentimes you may have an elaborate system, and some system is generating all the information that you want, but sometimes it is not going to the person who can really and truly use it for their input into their own processes or into decision making across the organization. Promote safe, efficient, and effective operations. I think everyone understands that. And ensure that the board and management's intentions are carried out, including those outlined in plans, policies, procedures, and are in compliance with the laws, regulations, and policy directives under which the company operates. So again, you cannot take one organization's control framework and adopt it without ensuring that it is customized for your organization. So Maryam has given you a whole toolkit that you can use. You just now need to make sure that you customize it, and customize it specific to your organization, especially when your organization is in different industries, and various industries can be very much regulated, or maybe the legislation governing the organization and industry may be very prescriptive. So again, when you're developing those policies and procedures, be mindful of what your legal and regulatory governance framework for your organization and your industry borne in mind in designing your control framework. Management's responsibility for controlling company operations. Management is charged with the responsibility for implementing, monitoring, and evaluating the system of internal control that assures security of the company's assets, detection, prevention of fraud, and the achievement of the company's operational efficiencies. Oftentimes, we tend to forget when we are designing our policies, etc., you're looking at wrongdoing, unethical behaviors. So you would have your code of ethics and conduct, etc., as one of the arsenal in your toolkit. But when it is that you're designing your policies, always be mindful of that prevention of fraud and wrongdoing. And especially like criminal activities by the organization, you always have to make sure that you bear those in mind when you are designing those policies. Consequently, management is specifically responsible for controlling the operations of the company in a manner which safeguards the company's resources, ensures the reliability of data, information, and disclosures, ensures the production of reliable financial reporting that complies with laws and regulations, including the company and insurance acts, well, this being an insurance company, yeah. Promotes efficient and effective operations, ensures that plans, objectives, and intentions of the board of directors and management are carried out, and ensures that policy directives from regulatory bodies and shareholder as sanctioned by the board of directors are carried out efficiently and effectively, ensures that the internal control system is compliant with legal and regulatory requirements and within the board's risk tolerance level. So your policy must be legal. It must be ethical. You cannot sit down there and design a policy that would lead to the organization committing an illegal act or being unethical in the performance of its operations. So it means to say that always be mindful of that legal and regulatory requirements and also the risk tolerance levels of the board. Yeah, so that's very, 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 very critical, very critical. Global organizations, when they move from one territory to another, you may find that again, they may have to go back into the internal control framework that might have been designed for their corporate offices, and to make sure that they are customized for the locations of the operations. So those multinational organizations always have to be mindful of not just taking corporate policies and trying to enforce them without making sure that they are customized for the various regions that they are operating in. Control processes are the policies, procedures, both manual and automated, and activities that are part of a control framework designed and operated to ensure that risks are contained within the level that an organization is willing to accept. And controlling is an integral part of managing operations. As such, it is the responsibility of management at all levels of the company to identify and evaluate exposures relating to the conduct of its operations, specify and establish the policies, operating standards, procedures, systems, and other disciplines to be used to limit the risk associated with the exposures identified. If you may recall in Maryam's presentation, she spoke of the control environment, and she spoke of the risk assessment, yes, as being part of that control process. And that is where you find that the control now is being linked to that risk assessment and risk management. Right. Establish practical controlling processes that require and encourage employees to perform their task in a manner that achieves a positive control result. So we cannot draft these controls and then expect that all employees will have the same understanding as the drafter. It means to say that the user has to be kept in mind whenever your control framework is being designed. So whatever policy, procedure, even work instructions, it must be not only in the language of the persons who are going to be executing, but also those persons who are reviewing, because especially if it is that you have a regulator coming into the organization to do that review of your organization's policies, yeah, or your standard operating procedures. Let's say, for instance, occupational safety and health or environment. What you may find is that if it is that they're not consistent with their understanding also, you may find that the regulators themselves can misunderstand, yes, and misconstrue some of your controlling processes. So bear that in mind when you're designing them. Maintain the adequacy and effectiveness of the controlling processes that have been established and ensure that the system of internal control operates effectively.
Claire, would we be wrapping up in a few minutes? Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I'm going to do that in a few minutes. All right. So to have an adequate and effective process for controlling operations, managers at all levels of the company have the following responsibilities: foster an environment conducive to controlling, identify exposure to loss and calculate the risk involved in conducting operations, establish control frameworks, establish practical cost beneficial controlling processes, establish an ongoing monitoring program. And then of course, information and communication technology controls, that's very critical. Yeah. And of course, the role of the delegation of authority for approving and establishing controls, where it is that the board of directors is ultimately responsible for ensuring strong controls are established for the company. sufficient to ensure company goals and objectives are achieved as intended. And in that way, you'd find that the board will set the standards, and they'll also ensure that the internal audit retains its independence and objectivity. Again, ensuring that the delegated authority of the board for signing off of the different types of policies and procedures, you do want to take some time and make sure that you get that listed and approved. So who approves certain things? Yes. Down to your work instructions. And right. And I think I can wrap up my presentation at this point. Thank you, Kamala.
All right, thank you so much, Claire. I think what was particularly fascinating about this presentation is that we've heard from Maryam about startup organizations look at internal controls, with Maryam's group being just working into its 4th year. And here we have heard from Claire about the take of a mature organization. And I think in both cases, what we see is this definite message coming across that control is everybody's responsibility, that you need the right tone at the top, that the communication loops between the board and management needs to be very clear, and that also that managers need to understand that they are an integral part of that internal controls are an integral part of their responsibility. So I think it's also getting back to this idea about it being actions, it being practical steps that need to be taken so that everybody knows what they are doing as they take on this responsibility for internal controls. So before we get back to discuss and I'm sure people will have lots of questions for you, Claire, let's turn to Brendan. Brendan King is an accomplished global financial services professional with extensive senior executive and board of director experience, leading large and complex organizations through strategic transformations to accelerate sustainable growth while reducing risk. And I think it's this idea about he is ideally positioned to lead organizations or business lines and contribute at the board level in organizations seeking to undergo transformations to accelerate and drive sustainable growth. So I think you have a lot of good advice here to give us, Brendan, and we'd like to hear your presentation, please.
Oh, thank you, Brenda. Very pleased to join the team here and really appreciate the work of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, which I'm proud to be a director of, that is putting on the conference this week, and I think is touching on some very, very important aspects that everybody should pay very close attention to in any organization that they run. I really appreciated the comments from Maryam and the work that they're doing at Red Sea, sorry. Wonderful work there, and really putting down on paper the internal control framework. And it's very impressive that as organizations, young as they are, to be able to do that in such a thorough manner. And we see that's going to, I think, redound to the benefit of the company going forward. Its commitment to using the resources of the state in such a transparent way and ensuring the controls are in place is critical. And this is very applicable to the Caribbean, where it's very important that resources in the Caribbean are used so judiciously. They may be less ample than they are in the Gulf. So it's really important that the governance is in place to make sure every dollar is being invested wisely and getting the return that's needed, and the population really understand what's happening. And I think, Claire, tremendous work at CLICO. It's the past in CLICO, we all know in the Caribbean is challenging, but putting in place such a framework of corporate governance will ensure the organization goes forward in the right way and has been going forward in the right way. And having the policies and procedures in place are critical to make sure that happens and continues to happen. I'd like to touch a little bit on my experience, and I know we're a little short on time, so I won't go too long. I'll just say a few comments and give a bit of background. I spent 30 years at Scotiabank, 20 years of that overseas, 10 years in the Caribbean, and 10 years in Asia. So I was very fortunate to be exposed to a wide variety of organizations and cultures, which do differ around the concepts of internal control and delegation and management and transparency. So it's very good for my growth and development to be part of different groups, different countries and different experiences. For the last 6 years, I led Scotiabank's operations in the Caribbean and Central America and was the chair of Scotiabank's boards in Trinidad and Tobago and the Dominican Republic, and vice chair of the board of the bank in Jamaica. So very relevant, I think, experience in adapting global policies and making sure they fit for the context of the Caribbean. And as we look at financial services, many people would think that the biggest risk to financial services company would be its credit losses that it gives from giving loans out, or liquidity risk. It doesn't have enough money to fund the bank. And those certainly are fundamental risks. But as systems and investments grew over the years, those became less of a concern to a global organization like Scotiabank. You know, we had very established procedures and policies in place and risk appetites in place for those types of financial risks. What really started to threaten any organization, and a global one for sure, was those non-financial risks. Things like anti-money laundering, know your customer, compliance, cybersecurity, fraud, improper sales practices. These are non-financial risks, but can have tremendously detrimental effects to the company and its reputation. We're all aware of the Wells Fargo case where there was improper sales practices going on in that company for a number of years. You know, they were raised at various times, but the corporate impediments for growth and success prevented perhaps really hard constructive action being taken. And the impact on the company, you know, 4 or 5 years later is still very, very substantial. You know, very, very substantial fines were put in place, restrictions on asset growth. The company was not allowed to grow beyond its current level. Obviously, CEO and many others lost their jobs, and the market capitalization of the company was impacted tens of billions of dollars, far more than the bank could ever lose by lending money. So I think that's a really strong example of a situation where internal control was not strong enough to be able to identify and take strong, consistent, corrective action to address this issue. So those were lessons that everybody in financial services took very, very seriously. The regulators around the world tightened up very substantially in all these areas that I'm talking about, and really required the banks to put in strong internal control frameworks. They were there in place, but really putting teeth into them and really putting the resources and the commitment behind them was driven by these type of events taking place in the marketplace, and the demand from shareholders to ensure that their assets were being safeguarded from these types of risks. And I think it was said by everybody today, you know, the tone from the top was critical. You know, the CEO of the company has to come out and be very vocal about this and put the reputation on the line that they will not tolerate this type of behaviors, and to ensure that the policies and procedures are in place to ensure they can't happen. And if they do happen on occasion, because as people will do, there'll be things that go wrong, but they're identified and they're dealt with in a comprehensive way. So that was very critical. The board of directors needs to oversee this, needs to ensure that monthly or quarterly meetings, there's an agenda item relating to internal control. The establishment of clear KPIs are in place, and those KPIs are reported to the board with corrective actions as required to ensure they are achieved. And the board has a responsibility to be questioning management on these issues and ensure that management has the tools and resources in place to to keep the bank safe, to keep the organization safe. At Scotiabank's case, there was hundreds of staff added in these areas of non-financial risk management and internal control to keep a global organization like that safe. But the same, I think the same concept applies to any size of organization with resources appropriate to its size, but to ensure the resources are there. That in Scotiabank's case, a senior vice president level and head of internal control was named for all 4 business lines of international banking, global markets and banking, Canadian banking, and wealth management to ensure that it was resourced properly and that the risks of the bank could be properly monitored and reported on up the chain of command to the CEO and the board. As head of the Caribbean and Central America region, I had a monthly meeting with my vice president of internal control, and all the KPIs and metrics were monitored very carefully and ensured that we could make the corrective actions needed. And this was to ensure that this was taking place in Jamaica and Trinidad and Barbados and Bahamas, etc. So that framework and KPIs are critical. Also critical is that the staff see themselves as being part of the solution. I would have town hall meetings around the world, and one of the first questions I would ask is, how many risk managers are here today? And sometimes you'd have the credit risk people put their hands up, etc. And I always had the clear message that everybody's hands should be up. Everybody is a risk manager. Everybody who deals with customers, who supports the processes of the organization, they are a risk manager. They don't, we had to get away from the concept of just delegating that or thinking that's risks department or audit's responsibility. It's not. It's everybody in the organization has to see themselves as a risk manager. So we enforced that very carefully, and we also tied, and I think this is critical, we tied variable compensation not only to the organization's financial performance, but to its performance against its internal control KPIs. And this was directly at my level, at the CEO's level, all the way down to the sales officer's level. So if they met their sales targets, but they did not achieve their compliance targets, for example, opening accounts that are in compliance with the bank's policies, then that would impact significantly their variable compensation. And variable compensation is an important part of compensation. At the executive level, it's 2, 3, 4, 5 times their salary. At the sales officer's level, it can be 50% of their compensation or more, depending how successful they are. So impacting compensation, really brings home the fact that this is important. So I think those are the key things I wanted to say. A lot of great things have been said already, and I don't want to repeat them, but some key themes that I resonate with are tone from the top, ensuring that you are adequately resourcing your internal control departments and frameworks, that clear KPIs are established and monitored on a monthly basis, and that they were reported and acted upon, that resourcing is in place, and that compensation is impacted when internal control parameters are not achieved, to ensure that everybody feels the pain. And finally, ensure that everybody in your organization views themselves as a risk manager, that they take personal responsibility in the areas that they oversee or that they're part of, to ensure that the organization is meeting its risk management KPIs and its internal control KPIs. So with that, Brenda, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Brendan. So what you touched on is what we've all been touching, what the three of you, Maryam and Claire, have been talking about: the tone from the top, making sure that everybody has the resources to see themselves and to be a risk manager, to have KPIs maintained and linked to internal controls, and compensation also impacted. And it seems to me, as you're talking about this, and particularly when you were talking about Western Union and the reputational impact, what came across to me is how if you don't have internal controls in place, the breaking of trust, the trust with your employees, the trust with your companies, the importance of that trust, which is intangible in so many ways, but once it's gone, it's very, very hard to repair and to get
that
back
was
again.
Yeah, that was Wells Fargo, the
Yes,
bank in the
Wells
US,
Fargo,
not
yes.
Western Union, just to be just because
So
I know
yeah,
them
sorry,
well.
yes, yes.
But you're right, and it's 4, 5, 6 years later, the impact is still being felt at Wells Fargo, and they're a good organization. They've been around for over 100 years, and they've done great work for the communities. But this issue continues to hold them back from reaching their full potential, and that was a clear internal control issue. So, costing tens of billions of dollars in stock market value, which impacts everybody's retirement and their 401ks in the U.S., et cetera. So, the impact of having a poor internal control system, is cannot be overstated. So the investments that a company makes, and that's why what Red Sea is doing is so impressive. In the early days, a company is obviously is focusing on the bottom line, and to have the foresight to put in place such a strong internal control framework, is extremely impressive.
Okay, all right, yes, certainly. I think you're exactly right. And I hear, Camilla, there's a question you say for Maryam?
Yes, it was a question which was asked a little bit earlier. Let me just pull it up again. It's from Camille Patrick. She says to Maryam, you mentioned the Tourism Service Initiative and internal controls. Can you elaborate, please, on the institutional support system or framework, for example, tourism training institutes, tourism development banks, that is designed to drive this tourism initiative in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to just thank my fellow panelists, Claire and Brendan, for your contributions. Claire, I'd love to get your policy. We do allude to items around the internal controls and who's responsible for it in our board governance charters and so on, but we don't have a policy. I think it would really enhance our environment if we had the policy like yours. Brendan, you've touched upon some very important critical pain areas that I completely agree with you. It's often not the obvious things, right? In internal controls and the financials, it's more people's behavior or very things that are easily missed, let's say. So completely agree with you, and I think you've touched upon some real pain points that resonate with me as well. On the question that was shared with me from Camille, so on training institutions, we've partnered in Saudi with, so tourism is new in Saudi. We never had tourism schools and training schools for the tourism industry before. We have one university called Prince Migran University that had the tourism program. We partnered with them. They elevated their program and made it in partnership with the Swiss university that I can't remember its name, Lausanne University. And now for the last 2 years, we've been covering scholarship students there. I'm not sure, someone's sharing, I'm not sure you want to share that. Anyways, so we've partnered with them, and they've graduated now. I think the first 2 batches, some of the pictures in the video I was presenting are students that came out of those programs that we had funded, and they complete the program and get employed by us. But we recognize that there's a huge gap and a huge pipeline of people that we need. So we're opening our own training institute, and we're funding even more programs for students, and also helping other local universities establish tours. So we do have another university actually that does have programs. So we have about 2 universities in all of Saudi that has had tourism programs, and we were already worked with one, but working with the other one to kind of bring it up to the level that we expect. That's in terms of kind of the pipeline of people coming out of training institutions and universities. We've also, we have a number of other partnerships with high schools in vocational training, so not university degrees, but just vocational training. We just started our first batch of that as well a few months ago. On the second question about tourism development banks, I'm not aware that we have tourism development banks in Saudi. We do have different development funds, and we're funded by the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Yeah, I think that's a concept that I'm not very well acquainted with. So I'd love to hear from my fellow panelists if there's something, if they know more about that. Thank you.
Well, fellow panelists, do you know anything more about that, Brendan?
And if we may also bring in, 1 second, Brendan, sorry, if we may bring in Anne Crick, who is one of our participants, because as she mentioned in the chat as well, she did a lovely compliment to Maryam, very well planned development with sustainability and dignity at the center. And she said she's someone who is involved in Caribbean tourism, and so she appreciates this effort. And we'd be very happy to have any contribution from you as well to this conversation.
Thank you.
No, I just wanted to say that I thought it was, I like the planning. So I like the whole direction in which we're going. And I think that what you have that we do not have in the Caribbean is the opportunity to plan from the very beginning. What happened to us in the Caribbean is tourism has kind of just evolved, and we are trying to tweak it at the edges. So I'm actually involved in a project right now looking, sponsored by the CTO, to look at tourism in the region. And it's fascinating how we're all now trying to get more, to become more sustainable, but we are building on a shaky foundation, and I guess trying to have to reverse engineer. So I learned a lot by looking at the video, and in particular, because I come from Jamaica, where one of the big issues that we have is places that the workers can stay. So what happens, and I know it happens in other countries, is people come from far to work in hotels and in the industry, and then where do they live? So they develop these squatter settlements, and that's why the word dignity came to my mind, because it was specifically mentioned in the video. And I think it's really, really important to do that. These people are serving, and they need to be served as well. So I just wanted to commend you on not you personally, but commend the country on what they're doing and saying that it's a model going forward.
I think that's a very important point. I think we are all seeing, the exploitation of migrant workers, and that the fact that you have taken the step right from the very get-go to make sure that there is that dignity and respect for people who come to your country to work. I think that's a thing that needs to be, deserves congratulations. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess we benefit from the fact that we're starting at a clean slate. So we have the opportunity to start from where everyone else has finished and to do things differently and right. And it's a greenfield development too, so we can really do it the way we want to do it. We're also lucky, as Brendan alluded to, having reasonable funds to support us with that. But I think what's more important is that we recognize that this is national money, this is public money, and we're accountable for everything and how we spend it. And yes, we are trying to be as transparent as we can about how we do that and how we're giving back to the country and to the community and to the world when we can too, in everything we do.
Could you talk to us a little more about this concept of greenfield development?
Yeah, so when I say greenfield, all I mean is in the development world, there's greenfield and brownfield. Greenfield is when you're in an area where there's no development. Our area, if you notice, it's untouched. So we're close to villages, local villages that are about at least 30 minutes drive from us. But on the beach where we are and those islands, there's no inhabitants, they're living. There are some small communities of settlers here and there, but they're very little. It's very different to brownfield when you go into a city and try and develop it, because it means that you have to work with infrastructure our colleague mentioned, you have to work, with stuff that already exists, and it's often much harder. So one of the things, for example, that we worried about is whether or not we would have to try and resettle people. And it was very important to us that we try and avoid moving people around, because people need to stay where they are, and they need to feel like, any development that comes to their homes is actually enhancing their livelihoods and making it better for them. And it's not just causing inflation. And we had committed to all 17 SDGs. We had committed to the IFC principles. And as part of that commitment, we really can't relocate people and cause, have them get negatively affected by relocating them to different places from where they used to live. So we do have to reallocate some people. It's very little though, but we have had to, because they literally sit like right on our development, but it's a very small number. I think it's under 1,000 people, and we're developing programs to ensure that they are dignified in how they're reallocated, compensated, and moved to areas that they choose to be in. So not moved very far away from their area, but just move so that they're not affected by the development too, because there's going to be a lot of construction, streets going through there, where they were. And it's not well-developed villages. It's very small settlements. The well-developed villages we're not touching. We're actually enhancing and trying to employ the people there and help with their livelihood as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. And how about the impact? Oh, let me ask first of all, does anybody else have any questions? Can we open the floor out to questions to Maryam and to comments?
So Carol has her hand up, Carol Nichols.
Okay, Carol,
Hi.
please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to say it really has been a stroke of genius to include this segment as a living example of diversification away from an oil-based economy into a greener economy, and taking into account the welfare of all concerned in the area. I think it is entrepreneurial because of its focus, but not entrepreneurial in the sense that we normally associate with very small ventures. I just think this is a wonderful example. It's a beacon, and I might be restating the obvious, Kamla, but to include it in this session, along with the fact that the controls are established at the outset to get the governance right, and to consider the people, the community, the employees, and of course, there is the profitability element. I just really wanted to congratulate the organizers and the presenters. And thank you very much, Maryam, and the panelists for sharing your perspectives.
And I think what I have particularly appreciate, and what I do particularly appreciate, is this whole idea about the documentation being out there. So often companies will develop materials and they get very territorial about the materials, and you get into copyright issues and you get into intellectual property issues. But it really is very, very striking that you're putting everything out there, and that we are able to take advantage of the technology to learn from what you are doing. So that's very, very much appreciated. And I think that goes into this whole idea about cooperation and working together that we need to be undertaking as we face some of these climate change challenges that the world faces today. So it's very, very impressive, that sharing of the materials. Are there, does anybody, our panelists, Claire, do you have any comments you would like to add?
I just want to say that I think we saw the importance of long-term planning. That is what I saw with Maryam's project, because oftentimes your country might just have a mandate maybe around tourism. And I think, as Carol said, I think it was there was a speaker before who mentioned that we in the Caribbean, we have inherited tourism, but to say that you have had a long-term plan for tourism, I have not seen that. And as such, you find that looking at the presentation that Maryam gave us, it really showed that all of the elements, the environment, sustainability, determining how to treat with that, your social responsibility, all of those sort of things are planned for within one long-term project. And I think that the control framework that has been put in place is really and truly to sustain that vision.
Yes.
So without that long-term plan, without that control framework, the vision that the nation would have will not really and truly be fulfilled the way it ought to be fulfilled. So I think that I guess all of us, regardless of which nation that we belong to, we would have gained a lot from that presentation.
Mm-hmm. And I think we are also all slightly jealous, Maryam, that you have this startup operation. And I live in a very old house, and I know that it takes a lot more work to repair and keep a very old house together than it does to build from the get-go. So I think you have been blessed with a very fortunate situation there, very fortunate. Brendan,
Well,
do you have any other comment?
If I may, I'll just say before Brendan's comment that I really welcome you all to visit Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has opened up for tourism. We'd love to welcome you all and maybe even host another, this conference next year or the year after at the site. Really, I welcome you all to come and visit. We have a very diverse country with forests in the south and things that you guys wouldn't have imagined we have, but we do have a very diverse landscape. So I hope we can welcome you all here in person soon. Over to you, Brendan.
Thank you, and I look forward to the visit. And I want to again echo the comment around you putting forward the all the documents that you put forward. I think is a great service to everybody, and all the members here could download it. I have all already and started to look through it. It's very impressive. It's a lot of work, and maybe it's not for every organization, but there's certainly pieces in there that I really think everybody should have a look at and trying to adapt it to your organization. As I said earlier, it's common and understandable that companies will be focusing on the bottom line and may not want to make these investments. And we see this in the Caribbean and developing nations more than perhaps in other areas. So it's important, and I really encourage everybody to have a look at it and start to incorporate it wherever you can, wherever your financial resources will allow you to ensure that your enterprise remains sustainable, which is what you want, which is what will benefit everyone in society. If you can sustain yourself and continue to grow, and a good system of internal control backed up by policies as Claire has put forward, and all the documentation that's there from Maryam, those are real tools to make it easier. It's sometimes very hard to get started. How to put forward, it sounds daunting. How do I put this forward? But with some of the work that's been done by Maryam and Claire, I think there's a roadmap there. So I encourage everybody to at least have a look at it and see if you can start to use it in your own business. And while it's a lot of work, the benefits are immeasurable and will help you sustain your enterprise through all the risks that you're going to face.
And Bob, yesterday when you were talking yesterday, you talked about entrepreneurship, and you talked about the need for the courage and the boldness to step out. And you also talked about how entrepreneurship unleashes creativity, unleashes originality, unleashes new ways of thinking. And we've certainly seen this demonstrated in Maryam's project. Do you have any comments for us? Any of your thoughts on today's presentation?
Well, I'm totally biased because remember, I have a background of architecture education. So this is absolutely my home territory. I think what Maryam and her crew have done is just absolutely wonderful. And also the context in which it's set, which is the, if you like, the future ESG context on the one hand, the next generation context as well, and also the, in a sense, the anti-critic context, because if you look at most of the Western press at the moment in relation to Saudi Arabia, it's absolutely against what Maryam and her people are doing. So, I mean, the one thing that really struck me just from a design point of view was in the middle of the workers' village, which is a pretty radical thing in its own right. There's a cricket pitch. Now, Saudi Arabia is not known for its cricket, but the workers who come to Saudi Arabia are, and it's being catered for. And I think in one sense, that cricket pitch says everything.
Mm-hmm.
We actually have a cricket match is being arranged between the workers and the company employees. We do have a lot of Brits, South Africans, and others that do play cricket. So let's see, but I think the workers are going to win. We're pretty sure the workers.
Thanks.
Yeah. And how about you, Kamla? What has been your response to this in listening to this?
I just find it absolutely fascinating from so many fronts, starting with the fact that Maryam is so good at what she does, not just in terms of the smooth flow of the presentation, but Claire, did you hear that very clear invite at the start of this? Now, my mind has never been first to go to Saudi Arabia. But during her presentation, I'm mulling through my mind, are we really going to have our conference one day in Saudi Arabia? There's such a brilliant way, to pull us into, and it demonstrates really when everyone understands and believes in the objective, which is to grow their sustainability through tourism. Really, really well done, Maryam. I'm so happy with your contribution today. But I have to thank Professor Garrett Feta. Let me tell you, it was his recommendation that I reach out to you and ask you to be part of this conference. Clearly, because he knew, as he said, he's aware enough about the cricket pitch in the center of the community. But he told me, he said, you guys are doing such amazing work with building that community out in the desert there. And you have demonstrated that for us today. I think it was a lot of good things coming together that, in fact, our participants too are persons who are involved in this whole area of tourism and development and can gain a lot from the approach that you have taken and help them identify some of the gaps in terms of what we may need to do. And really, it strikes at the very heart of what we are doing here at CCGI. We are attempting to ensure that we are helping all of our directors and our senior managers to be so much more aware of global practice, to build our own competence so that the region itself could grow. And you have really helped us to achieve that in a fundamental way today. So thank you so very much. So Claire, you and I have to book our tickets because we can't go without you. We have to plan whether it's 2 years or 3 years from now, or when COVID allows. It would certainly be intriguing to Zoom our global conference out there in Saudi Arabia.
Maryam, thanks. Go ahead.
Have you got your suitcases packed there, Claire?
Yes, definitely. It's always packed.
Yes, I think
COVID that has slowed me down.
Yeah, and I'm sitting in a very chilly Virginia, USA, and I'm thinking the same thing. I could do with a trip like that. I think February or March, that time of year, would be very good, very good, very good. Yeah. I think also, what is coming across to me is this whole idea that Judy Samuel talks about in the new world of business. It is a world of cooperation and collaboration rather than a world of competition. And I think when we do look at the very serious challenges that are facing us, it is important that there should be that kind of linkage. And I think what you are doing, Kamla, is also linking. I mean, as you started up this morning saying, we have been to, yesterday we were in New Zealand, we were in Hong Kong, today we have been in South Africa, and now we've been in Saudi Arabia. I think it is this idea about sharing the resources. I mean, we've talked throughout this of the need for internal controls to be resourced. And I think this is what you are doing. You are making sure that the way in which we work together is adequately resourced, and you are opening up avenues for us to be able to share ideas that are very, very important. And I have absolutely hated the idea of COVID and how it's cut me off from direct communication with people. But I would have to say that this Zoom and this ability to bring us all together is something that we have learned and is a definite silver lining to this cloud of COVID. of being able to reach out and talk across continents. That's so important. And to be able to share with you today, Maryam, all the work that you are doing is inspirational, and it brings the sunlight into, I think, our everyday lives. So are there any other final comments that we would like to hear from either Brendan or Claire?
Okay, so just on my end, I have shared the internal control template. So Maryam, I'm looking forward to looking at your customization of that policy and putting it in your toolkit. So I'm looking forward to that. And as I mentioned before, internal control is everybody's business. So once it is that we can get that message out there, I think that governance will be stronger for that. Thank you very much.
Yes.
No, that's the same thing I've been saying. It's, everybody's a risk manager, everybody's responsible for internal control, and let's move forward in that direction. And I think we'll see benefits along the way. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you both. And thank you everybody for listening. And thank you, Maryam. You can see how much pleasure you have given all of us in your presentation. And I think we wish you every good success, and we're looking forward to sharing your materials, using your materials, and keeping in touch with you as you keep moving forward. Kamla, can I turn it over to you?
Yeah, sure. But let's hear any closing words from Maria.
I was just going to say, I look forward to welcoming you all in person again to Saudi Arabia.
See what I mean? Thank you, Maryam. Thank you very much. And Brenda, thank you so much for a really, really well moderated session. I've totally enjoyed this, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join us there from the US. I agree with you totally. Yes, there have been some constraints, but Zoom is allowing us to find all the silver lining that we can.
Oh, yes.
And I'm so thankful there's so many people in agreement and willing to share of their time. So thank you all, because as we have it here, you are in the US, Brendan is in Canada, Professor Garrett is in the UK, Maryam is in Saudi Arabia, and Claire and I are here in the lovely Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago. So amazing, and how much we could share and collaborate and grow alongside each other. So thank you all very much. It's now, we're heading to 2 p.m. here in the Caribbean. So we go on our final break now. And then I want to invite all of you to stay on, because our final session for this evening is going to be also something entirely different, so we are challenging people in many ways. We are going to be looking at cybersecurity and the whole issue of the kind of threats that face so many of our organizations today. Because in as much as we have just celebrated what Zoom is doing for us in this online environment, we also need to be very particular about the risks and challenges which our organization faces. And we have someone who is extremely capable. That is Donnie Ramdat Singh. Donnie will be doing our presentation this afternoon, starting at 2:30. And we have 2 panelists, one from Jamaica and the other, who I think is Bajan, but he's currently in the Netherlands. So again, it's going to be a global panel and discussion for the last session this evening. So I hope everyone gets an opportunity to take a quick respite, have a break for lunch or so, and then we are going to be back at 2:30.
Right, thank you all. Thank you very much, Maryam. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Brendan.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.